Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Dollar Dialogue. Today's episode is episode 47, Emerging Clients Unpacking East Africa's Economic Rise with Mr. Jamie Mumma. So, Mr. Jamie Mumma is currently a freshman at the American International School of Dhaka, and he is a very passionate individual when it comes to finance, economics. He is also a long time EISD Finance Club member, and he is also the founder of CAF IQ. He is a member of Model United Nations, and he is also very involved in sports like varsity football, varsity basketball, and volleyball. So Jamie, as a student, is very academically well gifted, and he's also a passionate individual when it comes to finance, and he's also athletic as well. So it's really a privilege to get someone as Jamie here today who will shed some insights into East Africa. And Jamie's also from Kenya, which is arguably the largest, which is arguably the most successful country economically speaking from East Africa. So with that being said, Mr. Jamie Mumba, is there anything else that you would like to add to the introduction that I've just stated?
Obviously it's an honor being on this podcast. I'm just thankful that you give me the time to speak my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jamie Momo, for that kind words. So let's get right into it. So, firstly, for today's episode, I would like to talk about introduction to the emerging giants and unpacking East Africa's economic rise. So, just to give a brief introduction. East Africa itself consists of countries like Kenya, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Uganda, Rwanda, and South Sudan. And the key drivers there are innovation, strategic policy making, regional integration, and resilient entrepreneurship. So, with that being said, at first I would like to talk about some of the introduction regarding East Africa's economic success. So East Africa itself is located in a very geographically speaking in a good location in the sense that it is near the equator but not too far, and also East Africa also has lush vegetation, which sort of makes it a very nice place. Agriculturally speaking, and also compared to other parts of Africa like Western Africa, East Africa is generally speaking less corrupt, and there is some sense of national unity. There hasn't been any sort of war going on like any major war. So with that being said, like if you look at from the bustling tech hubs of Nairobi to the transformative manufacturing corridors of, let's say, Addis Ababa, from Kigali's innovative policy initiatives to sort of like Tanzania's strategic yes, infrastructure expansions, East Africa is quickly becoming, I would say, a vibrant epicenter of growth and opportunity. So in this episode I've mentioned before, we'll talk about Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, and South Sudan. So let's first talk about Kenya's economic rise in East Africa. And since Jamie is also from Kenya, I would hope that you can chime in as well. So Kenya's economic rise, I would say, stands out as a standout story in East Africa, and this is driven by several pivotal factors. So if I'm not mistaken, Kenya is famously home to the groundbreaking mobile payment system known as M-Pesa, which sort of revolutionized financial inclusion by enabling millions of Kenyans who were previously unbanked to access financial services through their mobile phones. And Nairobi, which is also known as the Silicon Savannah, continues to attract tech startups and global investors, and it has significantly boosted innovation-led growth. Additionally, Kenya's strategic positioning in East Africa and investments in infrastructure such as the standard gauge railway (SGR) and the expansion of the port of Mombasa have enhanced regional trade, transportation efficiency, as well as connectivity, which has sort of fueled both domestic and international commerce. Agriculturally speaking, agriculture still remains Kenya's economic backbone, and it employs over half of its workforce. And initiatives aimed at increasing productivity, modernizing farming practices, as well as redistributing land that were previously conflicted due to colonial past, is something that Kenya has done quite successfully. And this sort of supports the value-added agribusinesses, which have sort of transformed agriculture from like subsistence to a market-oriented enterprise. Additionally, Kenya's government also actively promotes investment-friendly policies. For example, Vision 2030, which is Kenya's long-term economic blueprint, emphasizes sectors like manufacturing, infrastructure, and tourism, which sort of creates a predictable and stable environment for investors. Additionally, lastly, I would like to also talk about that Kenya has a vibrant entrepreneurial culture, particularly among youth and women, which is particularly unseen in East Africa. And Kenya has probably a lot of youth and women engagement with SMEs accounting for a significant portion of employment and real GDP. So supportive initiatives and funding mechanisms are already boosting entrepreneurship, but also is sort of making Kenya into a resilient economy. So with that being said, I have a question for everyone, and maybe Jamie, you could also answer this. What would you say is the core reason that Kenya is successful economically? Is it due to government aid, or would you say it's more of people's engagement?
Okay, so I'd like to speak. So Kenya's economic success is rooted in its ability to innovate under pressure. So faced with challenges like limited infrastructure, high unemployment, and even access to services, Kenyans, especially the youth, have consistently found creative tech-based solutions that leapfrog traditional systems, whether it's a digital finance, online work, or climate-smart agriculture. Innovation has become a survival tool. Add to that a young, educated population, a supportive tech ecosystem, and strategic government investment in infrastructure and digital policy, and you get a powerful formula that's sustainable for growth. Kenya's story proves that when innovation meets hustle, transformation follows. So, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Jamie Mumma, for that insightful response. I see that Mr. Suprit Nagal and Mr. Shahzab Karim, both of your hands are raised. So would you like to chime in as well?
Yes, I would actually love to chime in. So, what would I say was the most main? What's the main reason for Kenya's booming economy? Then I would say that it is how money has been mobilized in Kenya, and that's because of M-Pesa. And as you already explained, it was launched in 2007, and M-Pesa is a mobile payment service that lets people send money, pay bills, and even take out micro loans, all from basic mobile phones. And you don't even need a bank account. And the thing is, 90% of Kenyan adults use mobile money today, and this percentage is more than any other country on earth, and this is a major contributing factor to Kenya's successful economy. In addition, farmers in remote villages can also sell crops and get paid instantly instead of the hassle about whether the buyer will pay the proper price or eventually try to uh, squeeze out the money and more money from farmers. And by also mobilizing money, people are able to ensure that their wages are paid on time, and the daily Kenyan wage limit is being met, because the proof would be evidenced and underscored through online transactions. In addition, the thing is, with this tech mindset, Kenya was also able to go on forward and build something that's called as a Silicon Savannah. And this is a tech ecosystem in Nairobi with startups solving African problems, from drought prediction using AI to e-commerce to digital healthcare. And then we could also add in something ancient, which is agriculture. Kenya's fertile land and ideal climate make it a powerhouse for tea, coffee, flowers, you name it. They're one of the world's top exporters of black tea. So, in essence, you could say technology plus their successful agriculture plus innovation has produced them such a unique success story. In addition, Kenya's economy thrives because it doesn't rely on just one big thing like oil or just tech. It is very diverse, it's bold, and most of all, it's built on inclusion. It brings millions of people into the economy through simple tools with a powerful impact. And that's really it on my end.
Mr. Shahzab Karim, I see that your hand is also raised. Would you like to chime in as well? I believe Mr. Shazia Karim is currently facing internet difficulties, viewers. So we'll continue moving forward. So obviously, based on the discussion that Jamie and Supreet have provided, and based on the introduction, we're clearly seeing a pattern here that Kenya is modernizing its economy through primarily, as you guys were mentioning, to the M-Pesa, which is like the mobile-based financial service. And why this is important is because it basically lets apologies, viewers. I think Mr. Shazib Karim has regained his internet. Shazib Karim, could you try speaking? Yeah, so moving forward, as I've mentioned before, Kenya is mobilizing its economy through through mobile transaction. But also, I would like to talk about some of the economical terms, since dollar dialogue primarily focuses on economics. So Kenya's government has made significant infrastructure investments to mitigate structural bottlenecks and reduce transportation costs, which enhances economic efficiency. And this is something that I have noticed, and through my research, that other East African nations are particularly finding it difficult to do, which Kenya is actually thriving in. So the flagship standard gauge railway, which is the SGR, connects Nairobi to the port city of Mombasa, and it has cut transit time for goods by nearly half, from like approximately 16 hours by road to just 8 hours by rail, which sort of facilitates trade and reduces logistics costs substantially. Additionally, there's like investments such as investment like these in Kenya, which sort of expands trade by lowering costs and increasing export competitiveness. Additionally, if we are talking about fiscal and monetary policy, so fiscal policy is like when the government like subsidizes or like provides taxes. So fiscal policy speaking, Kenya's central bank, and this is related to monetary policy, Kenya's central bank has effectively managed inflation, which has remained very stable, averaging around 5 to 6% annually. So by targeting monetary aggregates and adjusting interest rates to maintain macroeconomic stability, Kenya has attracted substantial foreign direct investment, which has totaled approximately $500 million in 2022. However, there are challenges like income inequality and unemployment. Kenya's Gini coefficient, which is something that we learned in geography class, which essentially measures income distribution, stands at approximately 0.40, which indicates significant income disparities. In Kenya, for example, there is this massive slum in Nairobi, if I'm not mistaken, and if I'm not mistaken, it's called Kibera, which is like a very big slum, and it kind of shows why there is like a income disparity. Youth unemployment in Kenya is also estimated at around 40% according to Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, which poses significant risk to social stability and economic growth. And despite these challenges, the government's strategic long-term plan, Kenya Vision 30, still aims to transform Kenya into a newly industrializing middle-income country to targeted investments in infrastructure, manufacturing, tourism, and technology sectors. So therefore, the vision emphasizes enhancing human capital, diversifying the economy, and promoting innovation driven growth. So ultimately, I would say Kenya's economic success illustrates how targeted policies, structural reforms, and technological innovations can foster robust and sustainable economic development. So so it's clearly in my opinion, based on the statistical analysis provided, that Kenya is successful economically speaking. It's well on to become a middle income country in East Africa. However, as I've mentioned before, there are problems like a high youth unemployment rate, which is around 40%. And there are also problems like income inequality. So, what do you guys think? Do you think Kenya can overcome income inequality and sort of reduce youth unemployment over the long term? Because these are structural issues. And if Kenya wants to actually become a middle income country, they need to sort of reduce this. So, Mr. Jamie Mumma, Mr. Shazib Karim, or Mr. Suprit Nagala, what do you guys think based on your research? Do you think Kenya will be able to reduce youth unemployment and sort of get rid of income inequality in the long term?
Jamie, I see your hand is raised. I would love to hear your thoughts.
Okay, so um okay, so answering your question, Arib. So yes, I do think that Kenya will be able to reduce youth unemployment and get rid of income disparity. But only if innovation is matched with inclusion and accountability. So, Kenya has the right ingredients. So, a young, digitally savvy population, a growing tech sector, and massive investments in infrastructure like the Nairobi Expressway and Konza Technopolis. These create opportunities. Platforms like Ajira Digital and Kenya Youth Employment Opportunities Project are already helping young people earn online or train in practical skills. The rise of gig economy, agri-tech, and remote work also means that jobs are no longer tied to cities. But here's the catch: access isn't equal. Rural youth, especially girls, often miss out on digital tools, quality education, or networks that urban youth benefit from. So, similarly, while Nairobi's middle class is growing, many informal settlements or arid regions are left behind. To truly reduce youth unemployment and income inequality, Kenya needs to firstly invest in decentralized education and digital infrastructure like Wi Fi devices and e learning, bridge the urban rural gap by supporting local enterprises, especially in agriculture and green energy, promote fair access to capital, mentorship, and markets for youth led businesses. Lastly, fight corruption and misuse of youth funds because economic reform without trust does not work. So, in short, Kenya can reduce youth unemployment and narrow income disparity, but it won't happen by just tech alone. It'll take a loud, bold, inclusive strategy that puts the whole country on the map, not just Nairobi. Um. So yeah.
Yeah, Jamie, I completely agree with you there, and thank you for your insightful thoughts. And adding on, I'd say that the Kenyan government, you had mentioned, like the Kenyan government in collaboration with the World Bank, they initiated like the digital superhighway project to enhance the country's ICT infrastructure, with plans to lay over 100,000 kilometers of fiber optic cable and establish 25,000 public Wi-Fi hotspots. And this project aims to improve internet access nationwide, fostering digital inclusion and economic opportunities as well. And not only that, like as you had mentioned briefly, Jamie, addressing the digital gender gap. Braiding Nairobi. It's basically an app that connects hair braiders with clients, and this eliminates the need for social media proficiency. And this platform empowers women like Jemima Etieno, for example. I don't know if you heard of her on Twitter or something, but this enables them to sustain and grow their business in the digital age that we live in. And not only that, there's Digiken, which was launched by the UN Joint SDG program, and Digiken aims to bolster Kenya's digital platform ecosystem by supporting 150 micro, small, and medium enterprises in accessing finance and developing digital businesses. Digiken fosters entrepreneurship and job creation. And like so overall, like I'd say that Kenya's commitment to digital transformation is evident through these diverse initiatives. And by leveraging technology, the country is not only boosting its economy but also ensuring that its citizens, regardless of location or gender, have the tools and opportunities to thrive in a digital age. And that being said, I see your hand is raised, Supreet. What would you like to add?
Thank you for such amazing thoughts and explanation and an explanation shared by you, Shazib. So, as Arib Malik initially questioned, how should we solve inequality and youth and unemployment in Kenya? Because the truth is, hard work is not always enough in this country. Because a young person can go to school, graduate, and still sit at home for years waiting for a chance that never comes. Meanwhile, only a small percentage of Kenyans grow richer and richer. So let's first start off with the truth. So in Kenya today, the richest 10% earn over 23 times more than the poorest 10%. This is a huge disparity, a huge gap. And what about the youth? Over 35% of young people are unemployed, and many more are underemployed. And this means that even when they do find work, it's not enough to survive or build a future with actual goals in mind. And this shouldn't be just a minor economic issue. It's quite literally a national emergency, because when young people cannot find jobs, they lose hope and they turn to drugs, crime, or desperation. And when inequality grows, so does anger, division, and unrest. But here's a good rule: I believe that there is a way out. And I would say that I have like my own five pillar structured plan. So let me explain each one. So the first pillar or strategy is to reform Kenya's education and skills training. So how should this be done? Kenya must invest in TVETs, technical and vocational education and training in every county. And students should learn practical skills like carpentry, coding, fashion design, agriculture, plumbing, welding, or digital marketing. And also, it should be made mandatory to incorporate internships and apprenticeships so that every student graduates with real world and real work experience. And by doing this, Kenya would be able to produce degree holders with not only job opportunities but a future in mind. And moving on, the second pillar would be creating youth focused jobs. So it's important to also focus on creating industries where young people can thrive. This means modern agriculture, where the youth is taught how to grow, process, and sell products with the help of tech and value chains. The second job would be green jobs like solar panels, solar panel technology, and EVs, and such other modern technology that's starting to blow up in Western countries like Europe, UK, and the US. And then there's also digital jobs like freelancing, virtual assistants, graphic design, coding, YouTube content creation, digital marketing, and many more. And even though the government has an amazing program called the Ajira Digital Program, it's only a good start. It still needs to be expanded across all 47 counties with Wi-Fi zones, job placement officers, and mentorship programs. In addition, when we talk about Pillar 3, we must ensure fair taxation and inclusive policies. This would make Kenya's economy work for everyone and not just a few people at the top. So, the structured plan to make this happen would be to introduce a progressive tax system where the wealthy contribute more to society. This would also mean it's important to raise the minimum wage to match the rising cost of living. Then there's also providing cash transfer programs for families living in poverty, just like Brazil's Bolsa Familia program. And let's also stop wasting public funds because every cent of CDF should be tracked, audited, and used to benefit the youth and the poor, and not just Kenya's politicians' pockets. Pillar 4 would be infrastructure, not just in cities but in rural Kenya. Every county should have good roads, affordable electricity, and fast internet. We should build innovation hubs in places like Kisli, Garissa, Eldoret, and Lodwar, not just in the capital of Nairobi. And instead of just building one Silicon Savannah in Konza, why not build 47 of them, one in every county? And obviously, there's just going to be one major tech hub, but by also ensuring that tech is modernized and enforced in the rest of the country, this would make it easier for Kenya to progress further on and possibly start investigating and exploring into artificial intelligence. Lastly, the fifth pillar would be to empower youth and entrepreneurs. The fifth and final pillar would mean that young people should be assisted in building businesses instead of just helping them search for jobs. This would be made possible by giving low interest startup loans through the youth fund and other institutions. Launching youth and enterprise zones in every county with zero taxes for new startups in the first 3 years would also be an amazing idea. And thirdly, starting a national made by Kenyan youth or something like this, a brand where the youth is able to uh, promote products made by their own young people would make it much easier for Kenya to progress their economy. And let me close by saying this: Kenya is not poor. Kenya is full of wealth, its land, its people, and especially its youth. But that wealth is being blocked by inequality, corruption, and the lack of opportunity. This means we don't need to wait for a miracle. We don't need to wait for foreign aid. We have what we need. Kenya just needs to be bold enough to act. So let's do this by reforming education, creating jobs, building rural infrastructure, and taxing fairly. And above all, let's ensure that the country of Kenya believes in their own youth, because when the youth rises, Kenya will start rising with them as well.
Thank you, everyone, for their insightful responses.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I had a very like a very intriguing question to ask.
Yes, Shazib, please ask that.
So, as you know, Jamie and Super, you guys might not know, but Ari, me and you from Mr. Banks's class, we learned that there are two types of theories for development, right? And since Ari, you brought up this topic of how Kenya can develop and move forward, you know, like in Mr. Banks's class, Mr. Banks mentioned that there are two main types of the modernization theory and the dependency theory. And for those who don't know, the modernization theory is for like when countries like lesser economically developed countries, for them to grow, they need to they need to invest in the free market and industrialize. They need to industrialize and implement free markets. And we can also see that in like examples such as South Korea, Japan. These have worked for them. But then there's also the dependency theory, where it states that the more economically developed countries are always taking advantage of the less economically developed countries. And it's just like, for example, China takes advantage of like some of the African nations for labor assistance. And dependency theories believe that like these less economically developed countries won't be able to develop properly, and they'll be stuck in this loophole because of the system that we just live in, where because the rich will always just be taking advantage of the poor, and so it's hard for the poor to develop and go themselves independently. So with this being said, like how, how do you think it really is possible for these African nations to develop, or will they just be stuck in this loophole?
Mr. Jamie Mom, I see that your hand is raised. Would you like to answer Shazib's question? So apologies, viewers. Mr. JB Womba has stated in the chat that he's currently facing tech issues right now. So I also see that Mr. Supreet Mangala, your hand is raised. Would you like to also like to answer Shazib's question before I answer? It seems that Mr. Shazib, Mr. Supreet Nagala is currently also facing electrical shortages in his house. So viewers, as you are aware of, Bangladesh is currently going through an electrical shortage, which basically means that a lot of us might not have internet access, because electricity is not often here in Bangladesh, which is why the generator is something that the people use, but generators are often quite feudal. So which is why probably Mr. Supreet Nagala is facing this issue. Regardless of that, Shaz asked a very interesting question, and personally, I would like to say like the dependency theory that Shaz mentioned. I feel like it's quite embedded in Commonwealth countries like Kenya, which were part of British colonialism. So basically, because of that, I would say there's like a history of Kenya asking for aid from the IMF, or let's say to the World Bank, or even to the US, and like this kind of taking loans, especially from other countries as well, like China, especially now that China's quite invested in Africa as well. It just goes on to show like Kenya is quite involved in the dependency theory, and I would say for majority of the Commonwealth countries, it's something that is culturally imbued, because of colonialism. Majority of the countries learn to be dependent on the colonizers, and this is something that Bangladesh also currently faces, because let's say Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, these were like the jewel of the British Empire, and Pakistan, let's say today, like over 50% of the debt are from like the International Monetary Fund, IMF. So it just goes on to show like the dependency theory is quite embedded in colonialist countries, and I would say for Kenya to actually like foster true development, they need to like get out of this. Debt is not necessarily bad, I'm not saying that, but Kenya needs to sort of utilize its own resources, not just rely on debt, because debt at the end of the day you still have to pay it back, often with interest. So moving on, East Africa also contains a lot of countries. And previously in Dollar Dialogue, we also talked about Rwanda versus Kenya, which is why we won't be talking about Rwanda today due to the number of countries that East Africa encompasses. So moving on, I would like to talk about another East African country that is very important in today's discussion as well, and that is Ethiopia. So Ethiopia is emerged as one of East Africa's most remarkable economic stories, and it is characterized by rapid growth-driven industrialization, infrastructure expansion, as well as the targeted economic reforms. Just to provide some statistics, between 2004 and 2019, Ethiopia consistently achieved double-digit GDP growth rates, averaging around 9.9%, which is like around 10% annually, which makes it Africa's fastest-growing economies according to the World Bank. And Ethiopia's economic model emphasizes structural transformation to industrialization, which is guided by growth and transformation plan, which is the GDP 1 and GDP 2. So the government strategically prioritizes manufacturing, notably in textile and garments, which leverages competitive advantage that Ethiopia has, such as low labor costs, and Bangladesh also employs similar tactics like that. And this sector contributes approximately 7% to Ethiopia's GDP, with significant growth potential. There are also industrial parks like the Hawassa Industrial Park, which have attracted global apparel giants like PVH and H&M, which sort of fosters job creation and export-driven growth. Agriculturally speaking, it constitutes around 33% of Ethiopia's GDP and employs over 70% of the population. Coffee, as you're aware of, in Northern as well, which is the school cafe that we have in Northern as well. The majority of the coffee that they have, I asked, is from like countries like Ethiopia. So Ethiopia is the largest export commodity when it comes to coffee, and generates around $1.5 billion in export revenues in 2023 alone. And government programs such as the Agricultural Transformation Agency, the ATA, aim to enhance productivity to improve seed distribution for modern farming tactics and market integration. Additionally, infrastructurally speaking, just like Kenya, Ethiopia is very much developed in terms of road and development. The $4 billion Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is the GERD, is Africa's largest hydropower project with a planned capacity of over 6,000 megawatts, and it aims to bolster electricity generation, driving down energy costs and stimulating industrial productivity. Additionally, the Addis Ababa Djibouti Railway is a $4 billion railway project completed in 2018, which has significantly reduced logistical barriers, cutting transportation time from several days to approximately 10 hours. So in economics, in IB economics, DP year one, microeconomics specifically, while we were learning theory of the firms, one of the stuff that we learned for perfect competition was that there must be no barriers to entry, and the products must be homogenized, and also that firms are price takers. In the case of Ethiopia, transportation makes barriers to entry less, because it sort of suggests that companies are able to like utilize the same road, which is the same for everyone. So it sort of cuts down transportation time from several days to approximately like hours, which sort of goes on to show that when it comes to like economics, Ethiopia is looking to create equity. Additionally, there's a favorable investment climate characterized by incentives like tax holidays and also streamlined business licensing procedures, which has drawn substantial FDI, foreign direct investment, totaling around $4 billion in 2022. And recent policy reforms under Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's administration, including partial privatization of state-owned enterprises like Ethiopian Airlines and Ethio Telecom, have further encouraged private sector participation and boosted investor confidence. So this, however, one of the cons of this, if since we're looking at it from a nuanced perspective, is that Ethiopia faces persistent challenges. There is high inflation, which is around 25% in recent years, which basically affects the purchasing power of the consumers and affects economic stability. Additionally, political instability and conflicts in regions like Tigray have adversely impacted foreign investment sentiment, trade inflows, and overall economic productivity. Nevertheless, Ethiopia's continued commitment to economic diversification, structural transformation, and strategic infrastructure projects positions it favorably for sustained economic development. However, if since we are since to be honest, Ethiopia faces, like I've mentioned, like conflict in the Tigray region, high inflation, and economically and politically speaking, they are not that stable compared to Kenya. So, based on that, is there any information that you guys would like to add about Ethiopia, or is there anything else that you would like to talk about Ethiopia's political or or economical challenges, which makes Ethiopia somewhat less successful than Kenya, or more successful, either way? Mr. Shazib Karim, I see that your hand is raised. Would you like to chime in?
Hmm. Yeah, I about to say that Ethiopia, it's a very interesting state there, and I'd say that compared to Kenya, like Kenya, I'd say that Kenya's further along. They're more developed than Ethiopia comparatively, like especially in tech and finance, um because if you look at Kenya, they're on a stable path toward modernization because the services and tech economy is growing fast. So like they're the four different sectors of the economy for Kenya, I'd say that they're moving towards the tertiary sector, and which are the services, whereas in compared to Ethiopia, they're kind of in the early to mid stages of takeoff, and big government projects are still laying foundations. And for example, like the key drivers of growth in Kenya, as we mentioned before, like the digital innovation, entrepreneurship, and the regional finance hubs. Whereas and in Ethiopia, there are also big investments, and for example, the big infrastructure mega projects, and the industrial parks as well. But as mentioned before, Kenya is a bit further along, especially in tech and finance. But Ethiopia is catching up with bold infrastructure and industrial strategies. And not only that, I'd say that Kenya's like from a dependency view, Kenya's integration into the global economy benefits elites, but not all citizens. Whereas Ethiopia's state-led model still feeds into unequal global supply chains despite local control. So I'd say that, like for example, modernization theorists would praise Kenya for its tech-savvy liberal economy and Ethiopia for finally embracing reform, whereas dependency theorists would warn both countries, despite different approaches, they remain tied to global systems that exploit them, like Kenya via Western capital and Ethiopia via Chinese loans and export dependence as well.
Mr. Jamie Mumma and Mr. Supit Nagal, I see that both of your hands are raised. Would either of you like to chime in as well? Mr. Suprit Nagal, I see that your hand is raised. Would you like to answer the question? Or would you like to add anything else to the introduction that I've stated?
Yes, actually. Okay, so now that you already brought us to the point where we can dive into a fascinating comparison between two of Africa's most influential and iconic nations, which is Kenya and Ethiopia, I have many things to add actually. So, first of all, Kenya and Ethiopia, they aren't just neighbors, they are leaders, they are competitors, they're ancient, they have been competitors not only the modern not only in this modern time but also back in the past. And while they walk on different paths, their destinies are tightly linked in the heart of East Africa. So let's explore who leads, who lags, and what can each learn from the other. So let's begin with history. Ethiopia is one of the oldest nations on earth. This was the only African country that was never colonized, and it was home to the kingdom of Aksum, the queen of Sheba, and Emperor Haile Selassie. Its past is very powerful and it's deeply rooted in pride, resistance, and identity. On the other hand, Kenya has fought one of the most famous liberation struggles against colonialism, the Mau Mau Rebellion from Jomo Kenyatta to Wangari Maathai. Kenya's legacy is one of activism, Pan Africanism, and resilience. So while Ethiopia represents ancient glory and sovereignty, Kenya symbolizes freedom, reform, and modern African democracy. So let's talk about economy. Today, Kenya is East Africa's biggest economy by GDP. As we already talked about, Nairobi and the Silicon Savannah is very contributing to its booming tech scene. In addition, M-Pesa, mobile banking, and strong tourism make Kenya a global player. Ethiopia, however, is the giant in population with over 120 million people and has been part of one of the fastest growing economies in Africa in recent years. Its massive infrastructure projects like the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam aim to transform the region. But there's a catch. Kenya's economy is more private sector driven, open, and diverse. However, Ethiopia's economy has long been state controlled, which has brought big projects, but also restrictions and inefficiencies, as well as immense corruption. So while Ethiopia builds, Kenya innovates. But let's look at politics. Kenya is far from perfect. Its elections are often heated, but it has a multi party democracy with peaceful power transitions. The 2010 constitution was a major step forward with devolved government and a strong civil society. Ethiopia, in contrast, has faced serious internal conflict, especially with the Tigray War, ethnic tensions, and centralization of power. Though Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed won the Nobel Peace Prize, challenges and violence have followed. In terms of governance, Kenya has more political openness and press freedom, while Ethiopia is still struggling to balance unity with diversity. So, let's look at the culture. Ethiopia gave the world injera, coffee, and ancient Christianity. It is the spiritual home of the Rastafari movement, and its Amharic script and traditions are completely unique. Whereas Kenya offers world class athletes like the Maasai culture, Swahi heritage, and wildlife tourism that bring in millions each year. So, when it comes to global image and soft power, Kenya shines on a world stage in sports, tourism, and diplomacy. Finally, who leads in East Africa? Kenya is a diplomatic hub. Nairobi hosts the UN African HQ, and Kenya often mediates regional conflicts. Ethiopia, on the other hand, just has a seat in the African Union and is a regional military power. But tensions between these two can hurt the region, like competition over influence in Somalia or differing views on a Nile and trade. Imagine if they cooperated fully. A Kenya Ethiopia alliance could be one of the most powerful forces on the entire continent. So, who is greater, Kenya or Ethiopia? The answer is both are great in different ways. Kenya is fast, innovative, and globally connected, whereas Ethiopia is proud, ancient, and fiercely independent. However, there is there are many negatives that are associated with Ethiopia. For instance, the authoritarian governance, as I already mentioned, is very fragile, and so-called democracy is quite irrelevant and not as present as is in Kenya. Freedom of the press is limited, opposition figures have been jailed, internet blackouts are used regularly to suppress dissent, and elections have been often delayed and disputed. Then there's also economic struggles behind the growth numbers. Even though Ethiopia has posted impressive GDP growth in the past few years, over 20% of Ethiopians live below the poverty line. Youth unemployment remains higher in Ethiopia than in Kenya, and many young people see absolutely no future in their own country and are working towards emigrating to other countries. Inflation is rising. The government's heavy foreign aid and financial borrowing for mega projects like the Grand Renaissance Dam has led to a massive debt crisis and questions about sustainability. So the economy is mostly state owned in Ethiopia, which stifles an entrepreneurship and innovation, unlike in Kenya, where entrepreneurship is starting to boom. In addition, there's also climate and food security in Ethiopia because it is highly vulnerable to drought, desertification, and locust plagues. And climate change is hitting the Horn of Africa hard, with Ethiopia's rural agricultural dependent population suffering immensely. This result has caused food insecurity, hunger, malnutrition, and millions rely on aid, even as the government pushes forward with national development plans. So, Ethiopia, even though it isn't a failed state, has immense potential, but without peace, without reform, and without inclusion, all of that potential risk being lost and is a bit further back in the path to success in comparison to Kenya.
Thank you for the insightful responses, Mr. Shazad Karim and Mr. Supreet Nagala. Mr. Jamie Om, I see that your hand is raised. Would you also like to chime in as well? Apologies, viewers. Mr. Jamie Mumba is currently facing mic issues. So, with that being said, I think it's fair enough to say
No,
for
no, no, wait,
Ethiopia.
wait, I could,
Oh, sorry, Mr. Jamie.
I
I'm glad that your
yeah.
mic issue was rectified. So, would you like to add something about Ethiopia as well, like in terms of its success relative to Kenya?
Okay, so I mean, Ethiopia is one of Africa's fastest growing economies, propelled by ambitious industrialization plans and massive infrastructure projects like the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam and new highways. It's transitioning from agriculture and manufacturing, attracting foreign investments in textiles um, and heavy industry. However, Ethiopia faces political challenges, ethnic tensions, like Supreet mentioned, and restrictions on foreign investment in some sectors, which create risks. And its large population offers a huge labor force, but also pressures job creation. On the other hand, Kenya stands out for its diversified economy, driven by technology, services, agriculture, and manufacturing. With Nairobi's tech hub or Silicon Savannah and innovations like M-Pesa, Kenya leads in fintech and digital inclusion. It benefits from relative political stability, strong infrastructure projects like the Nairobi Expressway and the Standard Gauge Railway or SGR, and a moving entrepreneurial culture. Challenges remain in inequality and political tensions, but Kenya's economy is relatively open and integrated into global markets. So, who's better? For innovation, tech growth, and financial inclusion, Kenya currently leads, and for rapid industrialization, infrastructure expansion, and rural growth potential, Ethiopia shines. So both countries have enormous promise but face distinct challenges. Kenya excels in services and technology, while Ethiopia is making bold moves to industrialize and build physical infrastructure. The future may see them complementing each other as economic powerhouses in the region. Um, yeah, back to you, Arib.
Thank you, Mr. Jamie Moore, for that insightful response. So, yeah, I would agree with you guys regarding Ethiopia in the sense that it is not as successful as Kenya, but it is still economically successful. But the main problem with Ethiopia is, as you guys mentioned, the political instability, specifically in the Tigray region. And also, I don't know if I think we didn't mention about this, but Ethiopia also also like faced a civil war in the Tigray region that was primarily fought from 2020 to 2022, and it was fought between the Ethiopian federal government and Eritrea on one side and the Tigray People's Liberation Front or the TPLF on the other. And while this 2 year civil war is technically ended now, it still shows that politically Ethiopia is not as stable as Kenya. So moving on, I would also like to talk about Tanzania, which is another East African country that should be talked about. And Tanzania is also the second largest economy in East Africa after Kenya, and it has shown steady and resilient growth over the past 2 decades. Its GDP averaged around 6 to 7% growth annually between 2000 and 2019. And Tanzania has leveraged its natural resources, infrastructure investment, and macroeconomic stability to push forward its development agenda. So, firstly, it's important to notice that Tanzania possesses significant mineral wealth, including gold, natural gas, and rare earth elements. Gold is Tanzania's leading exports, around 41% of total exports, earning over $2.7 billion, according to the Bank of Tanzania. And the government has implemented local beneficent policies and increased taxation on raw mineral exports to boost domestic value addition, which sort of moves forward towards industrialization. There is also a massive discovery of offshore natural gas reserves, estimated at over 57 trillion cubic feet, which has set the stage for long-term energy export potential. The planned 42 billion liquefied natural gas project in Lindi could become a game changer, which could attract foreign direct investment, create local jobs, as well as enhance Tanzania's current trade balance. Also, Tanzania is aggressively invested in transport and energy infrastructure to reduce transaction costs and enhance regional trade. The Central Corridor, which is a key trade linking landlocked countries like Rwanda, Burundi, and Uganda to the port of Dar es Salaam, has been massive upgrades in road and rail. The standard gauge railway, under construction and projected to cost over $10 billion, will significantly reduce the freight costs, increase trade volumes, and improve market efficiency. Also, electricity generation and access have also expanded in Tanzania. As of 2023, electricity has reached nearly 40% of all Tanzanians, up from 10% in 2005. Investments in hydropower, particularly the Julius Nyerere hydropower project, or the JNHPP, are expected to further reduce energy costs and boost manufacturing. Also, agriculture employs over 65% of Tanzania's labor force and contributes around 26% to GDP. To address low productivity and climate vulnerability, the government has also launched initiatives under the Agricultural Sector Development Program (ASDP2), which promotes mechanization, irrigation, agribusiness investment. And while Tanzania has comparative advantage in crops like cashew nuts, coffee, and maize, there is limited processing and market access, which is a barrier to achieve full potential. And also, it's interesting to know that inflation in Tanzania has remained relatively low. It's around 4%, and it is supported by tight monetary policy and prudent fiscal management. The government's medium term development plan, which is the Vision 25, aims to elevate Tanzania to middle income status through industrialization, human capital investment, and export diversification. However, despite these gains, Tanzania faces structural challenges like youth unemployment, which is estimated around 13%, not as bad as other countries like Kenya, which is around 40%. However, there is informality in labor markets, and also there are problems regarding land rights, education, trade policy, which are potential areas of growth. So, with that being said, is there anything else that you guys would like to add to the introduction of Tanzania? Any structural challenges that you guys think should be mentioned, or any other potential economic successes that should be mentioned as well?
Yeah, some crucial factor that you mentioned is that, like, um, as you'd mentioned before, the main drivers of growth there are the natural resources, agriculture, and tourism, and but there are a lot of challenges, Arib. But like for example, the youth unemployment. Over 800,000 young people enter the job market annually, and formal job creation lags behind. And also, the climate vulnerability, as we know, like its neighbors, Tanzania is highly expected to droughts, floods, and erratic rainfall, threatening the agriculture. And one crucial factor, as we know, which occurs in a lot of countries, the bureaucracy and corruption. Despite current improvements, business registration, land ownership, and regulatory delays still frustrate the investors who are looking at Tanzania. And so I'd say that, overall, Tanzania may not make headlines daily, but it's playing a long game. And if it continues balancing investment, inclusion, and innovation, it could become East Africa's most stable economic pillar, because in the future, Tanzania's diversifying exports beyond just gold and tourism. And not only that, they're also building regional trade ties through the East African Community and African Continental Free Trade Area.
Thank you, Mr. Shazib Karim, for that very insightful response. I see that Mr. Jamie Moma, your hand is raised. Would you also like to chime in regarding the discussion of Tanzania?
Okay, so adding on to Shazib, Tanzania is a rising star in East Africa, blessed with vast natural resources and a growing economy fueled by agriculture, mining, and tourism. Unlike its neighbors, Tanzania's strength lies in its resource wealth, from gold and diamonds to natural gas reserves, offering a huge potential for export revenue and industrial growth. The government has been investing heavily in infrastructure, including roads and ports, to improve um, the trade and regional connectivity. Projects like the Standard Gauge Railway, linking SGR to its neighbors, are game changers for logistics and commerce. Tourism, especially around iconic sites like Mount Kilimanjaro and the Serengeti, continues to be a major foreign exchange earner. However, Tanzania faces challenges with resource management, bureaucratic hurdles, and ensuring that the wealth generated benefits ordinary citizens. With regional integration throughout the East Africa Community, or the EAC, and growing foreign investment, Tanzania is positioned for steady growth, provided by its balances, provided it balances resource exploitation with sustainable development and governance reforms. Um, Back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Jimmy Momo, for that very insightful response. I wholeheartedly agree with everything that has been said regarding Tanzania. And also, I would like to say, like, Tanzania, in my opinion, based on the discussion on Tanzania, it is politically much more stable than Ethiopia, and economically also seems to be doing better than Kenya. Some might say, in the sense that it has low inflation. However, its GDP growth isn't as prominent as Kenya. So Tanzania, I would say, is in the middle between Kenya and Ethiopia. I see Mr. Suprit Nagala, your hand is raised. Would you also like to chime in?
Yes, I would actually love to, because Tanzania, it's not just a country that has stood tall with violence and noise, but it has stood tall with unity and strength instead. It doesn't grab headlines with conflict or chaos. It doesn't lead in flashy tech hubs, but beneath the silence, its most powerful aspect is its story of stability, cultural pride, and untapped potential that could and will definitely reshape East Africa in the future. So, let me explain. To start off, Tanzania has never had a civil war, not a single one. In a region, in the African region, where it's often shaken by ethnic violence and political conflict, Tanzania stands out as a beacon of national unity and peace. There is no, and this is no accident. It's the result of visionary leadership. Julius Nyerere, Tanzania's founding father, made a bold choice. He abolished tribal politics, promoted Swahili as a unifying language, and invested in education for all. Today, while others battle tribalism, Tanzania stands united by language, culture, and purpose. And speaking of language, Swahili, uh, is Africa's most widely spoken language, and Tanzania is its home. From Kenya to Congo, from Uganda to the African Union, Swahili is becoming the lingua franca of a rising continent. As a result, Tanzania has started building a cultural identity around it with music, literature, poetry, and film. It is exporting not just goods, but culture and unity. It's not oil, it's not gold that makes a country powerful, it's language, unity, and identity. And as I've already mentioned, Tanzania holds some of Africa's most incredible resources. More specifically, the largest concentration of wildlife in Africa is in Tanzania, including Serengeti, Ngorongoro, and Mount Kilimanjaro. Massive reserves of gold, natural gas, and rare materials also are present in Tanzania, and yet it remains one of Africa's least exploited economies. And this means huge potential for investment, tourism, and sustainable development while keeping corruption at check. So here's the kicker. While others are rapidly urbanizing, Tanzania still has vast lands and raw beauty that can become the foundation of ecotourism, clean energy with solar power plants, and green development. Tanzania made history in 2021 when Samia Suluhu Hassan became the first female president in the nation's history and the only sitting female head of state in Africa at that time. Her leadership is quietly but significantly redefining Tanzanian politics, focusing on diplomacy, economy, and openness to the global market. While other leaders in Africa grab headlines for controversy and corruption, she grabs them for calm leadership and vision. So the next time someone asks you about South Africa's about not South Africa, about Africa's rising powers, don't just say Nigeria just because it's at the top. Don't just say Kenya for its tech. Never forget about Tanzania, because while others are talking, Tanzania is building unity. While others are dividing, Tanzania is and is ameliorating Swahili. So, while stripping away from these opinions and noise, with over 67 million people as of 2025, Tanzania is the sixth most populous country in Africa and is growing fast. By 2050, it's projected to surpass 100 million, making it one of the largest consumer markets on the continent. This isn't just growth, it's momentum. And then there's also Tanzania's GDP. In 2022, it only stood at 76 billion, but by 2025, it had already crossed 80 billion, and it placed Tanzania among Africa's top 15 economies. Even during the COVID 19 pandemic, Tanzania maintained positive GDP growth, one of the few African countries, not only African, but one of the few world countries to do so. And it's not just a GDP. Coal exports earned over $3 billion in 2023, and natural gas reserves are estimated at 57 trillion cubic feet, as Arif just mentioned, among the top five largest in Africa. Tourism also brings in over $2.5 billion a year, thanks to Serengeti, Zanzibar, and Mount Kilimanjaro. Then, as I also suggested that Tanzania should start investing in eco energy, uh, the female president has already started working on such projects, including the Julius Nyerere hydropower dam. When completed, will generate 2,115 megawatts, and it's enough to power most of the country. This makes them not dependent on oil or petroleum products or natural gas, and they are able to run their country on eco energy from this dam. In addition, Tanzania is building railways, roads, and ports at record pace, including a $7 billion standard gauge railway that connects the heart of the country to the Indian Ocean. This is not just development, this is absolute transformation. Then we also have Tanzania's youth and its power, because it has over 15 million students enrolled in primary and secondary schools, whereas its population is only 67 million. In addition, um, over 60% of the population is under the age of 25. This is a young, growing, and hungry nation. If even 20% of these youth become entrepreneurs or engineers, Tanzania's future is absolutely unstoppable. According to the Global Peace Index 2023, Tanzania is among the top 10 most peaceful countries in Africa, further underscoring its stability and its power in this continent. So let me ask you this. A country with 767 million people, $80 billion in GDP, 200 million language speakers, trillions in natural gas, billions in gold and tourism, and a youth base ready to build. Does that sound like a small little country or a small player to you? Or does that sound like a sleeping superpower? Because
Sleeping
also,
superpower.
for sure, Shazib. And I would love it if you could continue talking about it.
Yeah, Suprit, I can add on, but were you about to say something, or do you want me to continue?
Not really. I was in a conclusion. I was about to say that because Tanzania may not dominate headlines today by the numbers, it's already shaping tomorrow. So that's really it on my end.
Yeah, Suprit. I mean, you basically covered it all, and like I completely agree with you, Suprit. And just to add on, like just to add on, Tanzania, it's a country full of potential, and it is growing rapidly, as you had said, Suprit. And as mentioned before, if like if it keeps growing at this rate and it keeps industrializing and investing in the free market, it will become a large scale economy, and in no time, if it keeps growing at this pace, I have no doubt that it will be a very developed economy in the future.
Thank you everyone for the comments that have been said. So moving on now, let's to talk about the last East African country for today, let's talk about Uganda, which is probably going to be our last country. So Uganda is often called the Pearl of Africa, and is currently charting a course towards sustained economic growth by capitalizing on its natural resources, expanding infrastructure, and investing in human capital. And with a population of around 47 million people, and one of Africa's youngest demographics, with a median age of around 17 years old, Uganda holds immense demographic dividend potential. Firstly, I would like to talk about oil reserves and the energy sector. A major shift in Uganda's growth trajectory is expected with the development of its crude oil reserves, estimated at 6.5 billion barrels, of which 1.4 billion are recoverable. This means that the government, in partnership with other companies like Total Energies and CNOC, is developing the Lake Albert Oil Project and the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, which is a $10 billion infrastructure investment aimed at transporting the oil to the port of Tanga in Tanzania. And once operational, this sector could add $2 billion easily annually to Uganda's GDP and significantly improve its trade of balance and its balance of payments. However, delays due to environmental concerns, financing, regulatory hurdles, corruption issues have hurdled progress. And for Uganda to fully capitalize on its resource, strong institutional frameworks, transparent revenue management needs to be done in order to make sure that reinvestment in public goods are essential to avoid the resource curse. Also, talking about the agriculture remains Uganda's largest economic sector, contributing about 24% to GDP and employing nearly 70% of the population. Key export include coffee, which is in which Uganda is Africa's leading exporter, tea, maize, and fish. In 2022, coffee alone generated over $900 million in export earnings. Also, despite its vast arable land, Uganda struggles with low agricultural productivity, poor value addition, and market access constraints. Through the agro-industrialization strategy and programs like Operation Wealth Creation, the government is promoting agro-processing, commercial farming, and export diversification to shift from subsistence to market-oriented agriculture. Also, Uganda is currently landlocked. So, not currently. Uganda is a landlocked country, and landlocked geography makes regional connectivity very hard, because the government doesn't have access to water, which basic or any river around any of its sides, which basically means that not only is it a threat to national security, in the sense that if one of the neighboring countries were to attack them, they wouldn't have any escape path. But also, another problem with landlocked countries is that there isn't any resources. As I mentioned, water is crucial to life, and if you're landlocked, you don't have access to water. So essentially, the government has invested heavily in roads, energy, and ICT, with infrastructure expenditure accounting for around 40% of national budget in recent years. And upgrades to the northern corridor, which links Uganda to Kenya's Mombasa port, have facilitated trade and reduced transport costs. Power generation have also improved significantly. From a deficit prone sector, Uganda now produces around 1,346 megawatts, with projects like Karuma and Isimba hydropower plants, which sort of boost energy supply. And as access expands, Uganda is working to attract manufacturing and industrial investment, aiming to increase the sector's 8% share of GDP. And with over 77% of its population under age 30, Uganda's future depends heavily on education and job creation. The government's free universal primary and secondary education policies have tremendously improved access, but quality still remains a concern. Youth unemployment is still lower than the three countries that we have talked about, around 9%, but it's still likely to go higher in reality, especially in urban areas and with rapid migration and urbanization. However, efforts to harness this demographic advantage focus on skiing programs like the initiatives on skiing the girl child, and partnerships with the private sector to bridge the human capital divide. So, with that being said, is there anything that you guys would like to talk about regarding Uganda, in any challenges or any structural challenges, or any economic positives that Uganda has that needs to be mentioned? Mr. Jamie Mumma, Mr. Shazib Karim, or Mr. Suprit Nagala?
Yeah, so I'd like to add on Arib. So Uganda is a country rich in opportunity, often underrated but strategically positioned in the heart of East Africa. Um, its economy is largely driven by agriculture, employing over 70% of the population, with key exports like coffee, tea, and fish. But what's really changing the game is oil. The discovery of significant reserves near Lake Albert, has opened the door for has opened the door to a future as an energy exporter. Projects like the East African Crude Oil Pipeline (EACOP) could reshape Uganda's economic trajectory if managed well. Beyond natural resources, Uganda is investing in infrastructure, industrial parks, and digital transformation to modernize the economy. The youthful population, one of the youngest in the world, is both a challenge and an asset. So if Uganda can skill, employ, and empower its youth, it could unlock a massive economic growth. However, there are hurdles. Politically uncertainty, uncertainty, underdeveloped infrastructure, especially outside of Kampala, and concerns about corruption and governance. The government's challenge is to manage oil wealth transparently, diversify the economy, and bridge urban rural inequality. Uganda might not have the tech hype of Kenya or the manufacturing momentum of Ethiopia, but it has serious potential, especially if it turns its youthful energy, oil reserves, and agriculture backbone into inclusive long-term development. Yeah. So I see Supreet's hand is raised. Would you like to add something?
Before I speak, I would love to invite Shazib to add something to about Uganda's economy.
Yeah, sure, Suprit. So moving on to our the last African nation that we're going to be talking about, Uganda, as Arib had briefed already about their background and history. Just adding on, talk like they they're very ambitious. Like for example, Vision 2040 is Uganda's long-term plan to become a middle-income country, focusing on industrialization, infrastructure, and all revenue management. Not only that, the government is investing in industrial parks, energy access, and road networks to stimulate domestic production and regional trade as of now. But even though even though they do have all these ambitious goals, they still face major challenges, such as like youth unemployment, as mentioned before. With Tanzania, Uganda also faces challenges with youth unemployment, because while the population is young and growing, formal jobs are scarce. Most young people end up in low income informal work, and there's a mismatch between the education system and the skills needed in the modern job market. And not only that, climate shocks, for example, because like much of East Africa, Uganda is vulnerable to floods, droughts, and unpredictable rainfalls, and these natural disasters are very common in these in Eastern African region. And this basically puts a lot of stress on food security. And So, but overall, I'd say that Uganda is resource rich, and certain percentage of the nation is very rich. But like I'd say that all boom, if responsibly managed, could dramatically shift the country's fortune. But sustainable growth will require investing in human capital, tackling the corruption and bureaucracy, and diversifying beyond oil and agriculture. And personally, if Uganda can overcome its governance and structural challenges, it has the potential to become a regional economic powerhouse in the coming decades.
Mr. Supreet Nagala, I see that your hand is raised. Would you like to chime in?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so when we talk about Uganda, we're talking about a country full of contrasts. It's a place where nature thrives, but political freedom struggle. A place where youth dominates the population, but unemployment dominates their lives. A place where there is so much potential, yet so many barriers. So today, I'll talk about Uganda, not just a pearl of Africa, but the paradox of Africa. To start off, we have the youth explosion. Uganda has one of the youngest populations on this entire planet. Over 75% of Ugandans are under the age of 30, and this should be an economic superpower in the making. But here's the contradiction. According to the Uganda Bureau of Statistics, youth unemployment is over 38% and even higher in urban areas. Thousands graduate each year, but few find jobs. So the big question is, what happens when millions of educated young people feel excluded from opportunity? The answer? You either get innovation or instability. Moving on, we also have oil wealth, but at what cost? In 2006, Uganda discovered billions of dollars worth of oil under Lake Albert. Finally, people thought, this is it, Uganda's moment. But fast forward to 2025, and what do we see? Oil production has not yet fully launched. Human rights groups have accused the project of displacing local communities, and the pipeline project has drawn international condemnation for environmental damage. So now, as the world watches and wonders, will Uganda's oil become a blessing or a curse exploded by foreign powers? Then we also have the discussion about authoritarianism versus democracy, because Uganda has been under only one president, Yoweri Museveni, since 1986. That's sorry for the horrible pronunciation, Yoweri Museveni, since 1986, and that's nearly 40 years in power. In recent elections, opposition leader Bobby Wine, a young musician turned politician, captured the hearts of millions of youth. But the election was again marred, and as usual, marred by violence, internet shutdowns, and arrests. So here's the tension. On one hand, Uganda has a strong government, or a strong power capturing government, and sort of relative stability because there's only one president in power. On the other hand, it has a growing hunger for democracy and youth representation. Then we also have the beauty of Uganda. It is one of the most ecologically rich countries on earth. It's home to one of the world's mountain gorillas, half of the world's mountain gorillas. It's the source of the Nile River, and there are over 10 national parks from savannas to rainforests. So this makes Uganda a tourism goldmine if it's protected. But deforestation, poaching, and climate change now have already threatened this treasure. So Uganda must choose: will it protect its nature for generations or trade for short term gain? So this is where the big question comes in. Will Uganda rise, or will they fall like the other countries exploited by foreign powers? Because Uganda is such an interesting case. It has a youth, it has a resources, it has a location, although landlocked but strategically surrounded. It has the cultural power, but it also has political tension, inequality, and immense environmental threats. So there's a real debate. Will Uganda be defined by its leaders, or more specifically, its one leader, or by its youth? Will oil and tourism bring prosperity or more problems? Will the pearl of Africa shine bright or crack under pressure? In conclusion, when talking about Uganda, it's not just a country, it's a story that's unfolding. It's a nation that's caught between potential and pressure, and whether it rises or reacts, it depends on the choices the people of Uganda make today. And Uganda's future is not written yet. This is what makes it so interesting to watch it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Supreet Nagala, for that enthusiastic response, and also thank you to Mr. Jamie Moma and Mr. Shazib Karim for the insightful responses as well. So, as we wrap up today's episode of Emerging Giants, I would say one message remains, and it rings clear: East Africa is no longer waiting for the world to notice; it is sort of building its future on its own terms. As we looked at from the beginning, Kenya is leading in its innovation-led growth, which is powered by mobile technology and financial inclusion, to Ethiopia's structural transformation, which is fueled by manufacturing and massive public investment, to Tanzania's resource driven industrialization anchored in infrastructure and strategic trade corridors, to finally Uganda's bold energy ambitions and investment in human capital. While the economically speaking, Kenya and Tanzania are probably, and Ethiopia are probably very close to each other in terms of economic growth. Uganda is still not up to there yet. But politically speaking, Tanzania and Kenya seems to be the most stable, while Ethiopia and Uganda are sort of not up there yet, in the sense that Uganda has Mr. Museveni in power since 1986, which could be seen as infringement of freedom of expression, in the sense that elections are essentially rigged there, and this is also supported by international news channels like BBC as well. And also, Ethiopia also has problems, as mentioned, the civil war, which lasted 2 years. However, it's still however, they're still progressing forward. So overall, in terms of a winner, we are in terms of a winner, in terms of economic growth and political stability. Kenya is obviously what comes to people's mind, and yes, that is true for its economically speaking. But Tanzania is, in my opinion, a silent winner, in the sense that it is economically growing, and it's in the sense that it also has low unemployment rate, inflation is very stable, and also it is gathering more foreign direct investment, and also it has political stability. So in the sense of that, Kenya and Tanzania are clearly the leading scorers in terms of economic growth and prosperity. But other than that, what unites these countries together is a shared reliance on strategic policy making, regional integration, and entrepreneurship and resilience. These economies are not without their challenges, be it inflation, youth unemployment, or political risks, but the trajectory is upward, and the world is watching. East Africa isn't just rising; it's redefining what economic emergence looks like in the 21st century. So, with that being said, for the final conclusion, Mr. Jamie Mumma, is there anything else that you would like to add to the final conclusion, or is there anything else that you would like to add before we depart for today?
Arib, it's been an exceptional privilege to engage in this earthside discourse on East Africa's evolving economic landscape, where nuanced analysis meets visionary foresight. Um, our discussion underscores that Kenya and its neighbors are not merely navigating global currents by actively reshaping their developmental trajectories through innovation, strategic infrastructure, and inclusive policy frameworks. Yet, the complexity of this transformation demands rigorous commitment to structural reform, equitable opportunity, and transparent governance to ensure that growth transcends rhetoric and delivers substance, sustainable progress. To our discerning audience, policymakers, investors, scholars, and practitioners alike, thank you for your intellectual engagement. May this dialogue catalyze informed action and inspire continued critical inquiry into the profound potential of Africa's future. It's been a pleasure, Arib. Thank you for your insight, Preeth and Shazab. You guys have anything to add?
Well, Jamie, you know, yeah, Jamie, I just wanted to say thank you. I really appreciate you for coming on here, and I really appreciate your insightful thoughts, Jamie. Like, I didn't. I know you're really interested in economics, political issues, and geography, and but I didn't know you had this many insightful thoughts. And to be honest, Jamie, I did learn a lot from you. So thank you for your thoughts and thank you for sharing them, Jamie.
Yeah, no problem.
Mr. Suprit Nagal, is there any final words that you would also like to say before we depart for today?
This was an amazing topic, an insightful discussion, especially with our amazing guest speaker, Jimmy Mama. And I've also heard about his own company. He's the founder of CAF IQ. So I congratulate him on this as well.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Subrit Nagala, Mr. Shazib Karmi, and Mr. Jamie Mombo. And it's been an honor hosting Mr. Jamie Mombo today, who is a very academically gifted student, but also who shared very insightful knowledge about East Africa, which I personally did not gather from academic journals myself, because this is the kind of stuff that you need guest speakers for, who can sort of provide primary real life examples. And thank you, Mr. Jamie Momo, for that. So thanks to the audience for joining us on this journey, on this episode through the region, through the East African region's economic heartbeat. And if today sparked your curiosity, stay tuned for the next episode, where we'll talk about another very interesting topic with another very interesting guest speaker. So that is all for today, and thank you for listening, and goodbye.